Namaste, dear learners, and a very warm welcome back to this course on Introduction to Indian Psychology. This week has been dedicated to understanding certain fundamental concepts in this subject. The first one we looked at was the self and identity, and we understood that the range of the self extends from the Annamaya Kosha, the physical body, all the way up to the Anandamaya Kosha, or our extreme potential spiritual self. And then we looked at Sri Aurobindo's definition or the mapping of consciousness, of the spectrum of consciousness, as well as understanding what are the different layers and planes and parts of the being. He also talks of the involution and evolution, and we look at why that becomes an important feature when we're talking about today's subject. In the third lecture, we understood the different states of consciousness as described in the Mandukya Upanishad, and I took this opportunity to take you through the entire Mandukya Upanishad and expose you to how the original ideas are embedded in these texts. I sincerely hope that you will take the time to understand it in greater detail at your own pace. We also looked at the types of knowledge, para, apara, vidya, and also Sri Aurobindo's 4 types of knowledge. But as we all understand that it is not enough to know and understand ourselves. What really matters eventually is how do we act in life. And one of the things that determines our actions is how do we act in a manner that is beneficial for our own evolutionary process. One of the terms that comes up when we think of evolution is the concept of adaptation. So today's lecture, we are going to try and make a bridge between the concept of adaptation and the Vedic triad of Satyam, Ritam, Brihat, and see where there are certain similar ideas. So the lecture overview, Western perspectives on adaptation, followed by evolutionary function, its design, efficiency, and trade-offs. We will also look at Vedic psychology and the trinity of truth. We'll understand what Satyam, Ritam, and Brihat are and their connection to the concept of dharma as mechanisms of higher adaptation. We then understand what are the foundations of dharma, the role of dharma in Bharatiya civilization and spiritual evolution. What are some practical applications, followed by a reflective exercise as we always do, vocabulary and food for thought. So what are the Western perspectives on adaptation? Let's look at some definitions and their functionality. So adaptation is an involved functional, cognitive or behavioral trait. It is designed by natural selection to solve recurrent survival problems. It enhances the organism's fitness in specific ancestral environments. Its functions include survival, mating, and parenting mechanisms. It distinguishes between physiological and psychological adaptive mechanisms. One important idea that came up when I was discussing this with my students was the fact that in order to survive, one has to adapt. But what are those features and characteristics of adaptation that allow species to continue? Is it the fact that they are the strongest? Is it the fact that they're the most intelligent? Is it the fact that they're the most resourceful? If we just look back at the trends of evolution, we see that none of this might necessarily be the only features that determines the survivability of a species. For example, the dinosaurs have died out, although they were such strong creatures. But we see that another creature that has survived everything and is supposed to be one of the oldest surviving creatures is the cockroach. So what features must this creature have in order to facilitate its survival and adaptation to the different environmental circumstances in which it is? So this would definitely involve some degree of complexity and design. So adaptations show evidence of complex and specialized design. It is unlikely to have arisen by chance alone due to the complexity that it involves. And this is composed of coordinated sub-mechanisms working together. For example, they say that the human eye is a complexly designed instrument for vision. The human eye, it seems alone, took nature about 300 permutations and combinations to arrive at this particular model. And now the amount of screen time we have exposing those eyes to, I'm sure that nature is planning new innovations to that also. And moving on, we have the fact that these psychological mechanisms are similarly specialized for information processing and information at various levels. Talking about efficiency and economy. So adaptations solve problems in an efficient and economical manner. They produce a positive benefit to cost ratio for the organism. And energy is conserved by targeting specific relevant outputs or inputs, and it avoids wasted effort on maladaptive or irrelevant behaviors. Finally, it optimizes performance within biological and environmental constraints. Now, one amazing feature about nature is that she is extremely efficient. If you see the way in which she functions, she would not waste her energies in trying to duplicate anything. And she's constantly trying to innovate in order to meet the requirements of the circumstance. But what we also find is that therefore, in order for this complexity to function in an efficient manner, we have to see what are some other features around the concept of adaptation. And one of the very important ideas of adaptation is the changeability and the openness and receptivity and awareness, the full awareness of that organism to its environment. Only when it can be fully aware to the circumstances in which it is evolving can it spontaneously or instinctively, with the way in which nature works, adapt to its current circumstance. There are sometimes certain trade-offs and mismatch, so no adaptation is perfect, and it involves functional trade-offs. We see that it benefits in one domain may cause costs in another. And sometimes this mismatch occurs when ancient adaptations face modern environments. And we see that in the case of today's context, that anxiety was once upon a time a protective mechanism. Now it becomes a debilitating one in modern life, because then it increases your stress hormones, and then that only leads to more burnout and frustration. So adaptability requires balancing stability with responsiveness to change. And just before we move on to the Vedic trinity of Satyam, Ritam, Brihat, we see that adaptation has certain classical features that I had mentioned. So one was that it requires an absolute presence to the current circumstances. And it also requires an openness and an awareness to allow the species or the organism to change itself. So these are three very important ideas, and I like to summarize them as 3 P's, which are the present, perfect, presence. The more one can be fully present in the present moment, there we will have understanding of the circumstances, of all the details of the circumstance that requires us to do the necessary adaptation. So in this context, again, when we are functioning normally, when we need to act, the regular basis for our decisions is the limited data set of conditionings that we are functioning on. Or we are looking at future possibilities and determining what needs to be done. Either case, the data set that we are falling back on is the limited conditioning data set that we have in our minds. But if we have that, then the necessary implication is that when we are in a present environment, we are only looking at it from a partial lens, because the resources that we are falling back belong to a previous time or a past experience. And therefore, we might miss out on the details of the present moment. So what we see, therefore, is important is the ability to be fully present with all our senses and at all the levels of our being to enable us to adapt to the changes with the optimum information that we can gather. Therefore, if we can be fully present, so perfectly present in the present moment, we will have the necessary resources to understand the ideal circumstances in which we need to act. Moving on to the idea of the Vedic trinity of Satyam, Ritam, Brihat, we will start recognizing some of these features there. So what is this Vedic trinity or the triad of truth? Sri Aurobindo identifies the supermind, as we have already seen, or the Vijnana Maya Kosha, that nature or that level of consciousness as being typical or being imbued with the features of Satyam, Ritam and Brihat. So it is defined by these 3 qualities, and Satyam is the truth of being, Ritam is the truth of action, and Brihat is the vastness of consciousness. In this map, as you can see, we have here the 7 worlds, and in these 7 worlds, we have, for example, the first 3, which represent the Supreme Satchidananda, the triple divine worlds, and then we have the bottom 3 worlds, so that was the higher worlds, and the lower hemisphere has got the mind, life and matter, the triple lower worlds of pure mind, life force and matter. And then we saw the link principle, which was the world of supermind or the supramental consciousness that Sri Aurobindo says. So he says that this has the characteristics of truth, right and vast. It's manifested in Swar and its three luminous heavens. So what does that mean? As we had seen that the ideal exists in the top layer, the top world, the manifestation is in the lower world. The supramental world contains the link map between the two. So it has the understanding of the ideal and the understanding of the manifestation. So it holds the ideal, represents it in execution. So what is Satyam? So it is the essential truth, and it represents the static, eternal and absolute existence. It comes from the root as, and as means to be. So Sat means being and Satya means beingness. It's the very quality of beingness. So normally we associate the term Satya with truth. But if we ask the question, what does truth itself really mean? We see that the usual definitions say that it is about representing facts as such. But when we understand the etymology of the term Satya, we get a whole new dimension that is revealed. And what does it say? What is this truth of being? Truth implies the ability to be fully present in ourselves, because it's only then that we get the vision of the underlying ideal that is possible. So therefore, it is the truth of what is fundamentally. It refers to the essence behind all the changing forms. And in adaptation, it is the core identity of the self. Without Satyam, adaptation is merely the shifting of appearances, because it is not taking into consideration the requirements or the maximum resources of the present environment. What is Rita? Rita is ordered truth, or Sri Aurobindo also says it's the dynamic truth in action. It is the root of the word right. Therefore, if you have something that is right, that can only happen on the backdrop of a gold standard that we have. What is this gold standard that we are referring to? That gold standard is Satya. So, Ritam means the dynamic law of truth. It is the right action, not just the right action which is mentally conceived of, but the spontaneous right arrangement where one understands what is the ideal situation and one is able to execute it in its ideal format. This governs the manifestation of the essence or Satyam into form. It connects the inner truth with our outer expression. And finally, it aligns the individual will with the universal movement. And I'd like to draw your attention to examples that we find from nature. So if you see a cat, for example, jump from one point to another, okay, or from one branch to another, you see that the cat doesn't have to sit and calculate. It just knows spontaneously the exact amount of energy it needs, the exact amount of height it needs in order to make that jump. So what taught it, or how did it know how to jump that distance and land perfectly on the other point? There is a working of the right measure. If the cat, for whatever reason, misses it, then it will fall, and that can also lead to its end. So therefore, the very process of the adaptation mechanism required the understanding of what is the ideal to be undertaken, the ideal action to be undertaken, and then to be able to execute that in reality, which is the Rita. Okay, so this is a very, very important concept, and we'll also see why. And finally, we have Brihat, which means the vastness. So Brihat means the vast or infinite voidness. It is the condition required for truth to manifest. It is the limited ego consciousness that distorts the truth into unrita or falsehood. And this allows the expansion beyond the ego, and it is necessary for perfection. It provides the unbounded context for Satyam and Ritam. Now, what do we mean by that? Let us take a scenario where you have to do an action. Now, mathematically, at that given point, taken all the resources into consideration, there is an optimum decision that you can make. But do we normally know what that optimum is? In fact, ironically, the most intelligent species, the human being, is the only one in all of nature's creations that asks the question, what should I do next? because we have disconnected ourselves from the larger grid of nature where everything is working with mathematical precision and directly tuned in to the right of the moment. It is only the human entity that is lost because we have, in a sense, got our mental functions, and those mental functions have got their ego consciousness, which have limited access to what is the real action to be undertaken. And therefore, in this scenario where you have an ideal potential, which is the Satya, there is a requirement to execute it ideally, which is the Rita or the right. And when you can do that, then the result is the biggest. So what is the relationship between the three? We see that if you have an ideal vision and you're able to execute it ideally, what will happen to the result? It will be ideal or Brihat or the vast. So the Bharatiya mind actually realized very early on that there is no point trying to focus on trying to get the best result, because this is the outcome of the relationship between Satya and Ritam. If you have Satya, the closer the Rita is to the Satya, automatically the Brihat will be bigger. If the Rita or the action is far away from the ideal, then the result will automatically become small. So there's a kind of an inverse relationship between the distance between Satya and Rita and the extent of Brihat or vast or the best result that you can get. So the focus of the Bharatiya mind was on cultivating the concept or the understanding of Rita. So what was it there for? We see in the Yoga Sutra, they talk of this formula of success, that if you can focus your attention on getting it right, then many problems are automatically solved. But in order to get it right, you have to be able to connect to the Satya of that situation. And if you can do that, then automatically the Brihat is catered to. And then we have the sutra which says, Ritam Bhara Tatra Prajna. This is in the first chapter of Samadhipada in the Yoga Sutra, where it says, what is that highest intelligence that you should have? It is Ritam Bhara, full of the idea of the right of things. So it says there the consciousness is truth bearing. And I give you an example. This is in fact one of my favorites. So what does it say here? That when you want to perform a surgery and you need to wear a glove, you have all the skills. If you wear a glove that is too loose, what will happen? You'll not be able to perform the surgery. If you have a glove that's very tight, you'll not be able to perform the surgery in the best way possible. And therefore, what do you need to know? You need to wear the right glove. When will you wear the right glove? When you know the contours of your hand, which is Satya, then you wear a glove that fits it right, which will be Rita, and then whatever action you undertake with that will be Brihat, considering that you have the skill. And we'll see how this idea becomes very important in the context of Dharma. So what is this idea of Dharma? Now, when you wear the right glove, what happens? When you're wearing the right glove, what is its relationship with your hand? I'll take you back to the previous two instances. If you wear a loose glove, what is its relationship with your hand? How does it hold your hand? Not very well. If you wear a tight glove, you are constricted. But when you wear the right glove, it holds your hand in the best way possible. That holding of the ideal in terms of the reality and in terms of the execution is the very concept of Dharma. So the idea of Dharma implies the knowledge of the ideal, the execution of the ideal, and that automatically implies the ideal result. So Dharma was regarded as the one-word constitution of Bharata. And just to tell you, somebody had very interestingly phrased the first part or the first quarter of the first verse of the Bhagavad Gita, which says, Dharma kshetre kurukshetre. And they told me that you can rephrase this to summarize the entire teachings of the Gita, which is kshetre kshetre dharma kuru. In every instance, understand what is the ideal, find the mechanisms of executing it, and you don't have to worry about the result. So what is Dharma and the foundation of this idea? As we have just seen, Dharma comes from the root dhr, which means that which holds or supports existence. It is the law of being and not like we normally translate it as religion. In fact, Dharma and religion have something in common when we talk of the context of Sanatana Dharma. But Sanatana Dharma again is not a religion, as you know. It represents those eternal laws that uphold all of creation. So what was those universal laws that are eternal, that uphold everything and sustain things for the way that they are? So then we talk of dharma as being the integrating factor between satyam, the truth, and life. It governs the rhythm of the individual and social growth as well. So what is the etymology and definition of dharma? So it says, dharana dharmam ityahuhu dharmo dharayate prajaha. So what is this? This is from Vyasa's Mahabharata, and it means that they call it dharma because of its capacity to uphold, dharana. It is dharma that stays and upholds all created beings, or prajaha. The definition dharma, therefore, is so called because it upholds all beings. It is the essential law that maintains the integrity of an entity. And in psychology, it is the holding of one's inner truth against external pressures. So when one lives according to one's swadharma, then one is able to resist the different forces and the different pressures that come from different quarters. And it is when we are able to live our truths that it also gives us the courage to face whatever circumstance. So in the context of the hand, we see that when you're wearing the glove, each one's hand is not the same. So my glove cannot fit you, and therefore this one size fits all is not really very practical. What is required is to discover the contours and the dimensions of one's own hand and one's own being to that extent, and see what is it that upholds us or would allow us to realize the full potential of who we are. And just to carry on this in the context of Sanatana Dharma, so the Sanatana Dharma was nothing more but an invitation to every being, irrespective of their cultural background, to try and recognize these laws behind things and to try and uphold them in their execution so that everybody will enjoy the best results. And therefore, what was its functional goal? As defined in the Vaisheshika Sutra, it has a dual achievement. So, yato bhyudaya nishreyasa siddhihi sadharmaha. So, what is this yato bhyudaya nishreyasa siddhihi? This is abhyudaya means the worldly prosperity and social success. Nishreyasa means the supreme spiritual good and liberation. It is the glue, therefore, that binds the universe. In the psychological sense, it is the internal law that holds one's personality together and prevents the fragmentation of the self. So everything in Bharata was defined with this notion of dharma, as we will see. So this civilization was built on dharma as the central idea, says Sri Aurobindo, Annie Besant, all of them have recognized the central role of dharma. So if you look at our text, we had these dharma shastras, and what were the dharma shastras saying? That if you want to get the best result of any action, understand the dharma of the particular resources that you are going to be engaging with. So if you have a teacher in a classroom, you have to understand that the teacher has a dharma, the students have their own dharma, the subject has its own dharma, the manner of delivering that content has its own dharma. When all these dharmas align, that's when you will have the optimum experience of the teaching learning exercise that we are all undertaking. And therefore, the understanding of dharma was that it belongs to everything in creation. And another important idea is that the dharma is not static. It is constantly progressing because life is progressing, circumstances are progressing. So while there are universal dharmas that the Dharma Shastras talk about, but within those Dharma Shastras, there are also specific dharmas for those particular times. And therefore, if we are trying to apply Manu's rules or Manusmriti's rules in today's world, we see that there is a mismatch, because when Manu wrote his Dharma Shastra, it was meant for a particular age and time. There are things within that that are applicable universally and eternally across time, but there are many features that were actually laws and rules meant for that particular period. And therefore, we make this mismatch of trying to apply Manu in today's age and then saying that, Manu therefore was a very backward-minded individual and repressive in the ideas that he presented. So it's worth understanding the context of the application of any text and also the application of any law. It also guided kinship, ethics, and social structure. It ensured the stability through adherence to Swadharma, and this is an idea that we're going to look at next. It was the goal to spiritual freedom, moksha, through right living. And right living is a very important context or a very important idea in Buddhism. They have the Eightfold Path and everything is right, 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 right. You have the right speech, right thought, right action, etc. In Jainism also, they speak of Ratnatrayam as the path to moksha. But they use the term samyak, like samyak darshana or right faith, samyak jnana or right conduct, and samyak charitra or right conduct. And it protected society against chaos or adharma and disintegration. And we see therefore in the Gita, Sri Krishna says that every time that there is adharma that is prevalent, which essentially means that people have got disconnected from the right enactment of the laws of things. So every time that happens, then there is a mismatch and a misalignment that takes place and things will lead towards the disintegration. So therefore, it is important that every time there is adharma, Krishna says that I manifest myself in order to set that wheel of dharma back in place so that everybody can flourish and be nourished by the understanding of the right actions to be undertaken. So let's look at the concept of Satyameva Jayate in its entire context as mentioned in the mantra of the Mundakopanishad. It says, Satyam eva jayate nanritam satyena pantha vitato devayanaha Yena kraman kirishayo hyaptakama yatra tat satyasya paramam nidhanam. What does it mean? It is truth that conquers and not falsehood. By truth was stretched out the path of the journey of the gods, by which the sages, winning their desire, ascend there where truth has its supreme abode. So our motto is Satyam eva jayate. And what does that imply? The verb jayate can be written in two ways. Jayate as in Atmanepadam, where the person who is doing that action is enjoying the fruits themselves. And the second is jayati, which is about making somebody else win. So here we say the verb is used as jayate. So truth or the ideal is a self-winner. It is not about whom it is making other people win. But what is important in this particular motto is that we have said Satyam eva jayate. The second part was crucial, which was na anritam, nanritam. And by leaving that out, I think we've done ourselves a major disservice because what it reminds us is that it's not enough to have the ideal concept alone. That will only be a winner when we are able to convert it into an ideal action, which is rita. So, Satyam eva jayate na anritam, not the not right. So what is the relationship between dharma and adaptation? Dharma therefore bridges the gap between material adaptation and spiritual evolution. It is the adaptation link that while Western adaptation focuses on how an organism fits into the environment, the etymology of dharma suggests an internal holding of one's essential nature or satya amidst external change. So very fascinating kind of a nuance there of the relationship between the internal vibratory force of the individual and the external pressures that are coming towards it. And in the normal context of material adaptation, this happens spontaneously by the organism, whereas in the context of Bharatiya Darshana or the Bharatiya worldview, dharma is a call upon the individual in particular to uphold the very best that they are capable of. And then that individual will automatically be able to override various circumstances of their environment. So adaptation as spiritual transformation, ordinarily adaptation adjusts to the limited environment as we've seen. But Vedic adaptation also adjusts to the brihat or the vast. So there is this truth consciousness which is vast. The more we are able to align with it, the more the results that we will experience will also be equally vast. It moves from mental constructions of reality and the basis of our actions to the supramental truth consciousness where one doesn't have to ask the question, what do I need to do now? But because of the internal connection one has with the grid of the cosmos, one knows at any given moment what is the right action that needs to be performed. Just like it is there in the animal kingdom, but here it is a call for the individual to override their mental constructions and become receptive to the functioning of the truth consciousness. Here, mind adapts to stress, There, the soul or the psychic being that we saw in the context of Sri Aurobindo's spectrum of consciousness, the psychic being adapts to truth requirements. So true adaptation is the harmonizing of one's actions with the cosmic order or the Rita. What is the goal, therefore? It is perfect adaptation. Western adaptation focuses on survival of the physical. Indian psychology aims for Daivi Prakriti. Daiva again comes from the word Deva, which means illumined light. So it aspires towards divinizing of our nature. Perfect adaptation, therefore, is acting according to Rita. And the result is harmony, lack of conflict, and the right relationship of things. This is the descent of the supermind into life that Sri Aurobindo talks about. And an exercise for you. So try to distinguish between reactive adaptation and action aligned with rhythm. This is a fascinating kind of an exercise to do, to try and put your attention on the decision-making parameters of your life. What are those factors that you are? We are all into the mental modes of making our decisions, and therefore we have so many challenges. So the call of the Vedas and the call of the Upanishads is how can we start observing the best way to respond to a situation. And Sri Aurobindo had given us a secret, and which is also there in all of our yogic traditions. The more and more we can surrender to the internal being, the more and more we can open up to the Supreme Consciousness to guide us, to become instruments of that action, of that divine law of being. We will be able to perform actions as they must be done. And therefore in the Bhagavad Gita, Sri Krishna tells Arjuna, Sarva dharman parityajya mam ekam sharanam braja aham tva sarva papebhyo mokshayishyami ma shucha. So, O Arjuna, don't worry about other dharmas. Forget everything else. Forget that your family. Forget everything else. Now there is a need for action of a certain order. Surrender yourself to me, and I will make sure that you are able to experience the best action, and the results will be for the greater good of all. So one very important notion that underlies the idea of dharma is acting for the greater good of all, the individual and the collective. And here we see that it is important for you to try and identify the stressor. Think of the recent situation where you had to adapt a conflict at work, a sudden change in plans. Then analyze this from a Western view. How did you cope? Was it a survival mechanism, fight or flight? Or did you compromise your values to fit in? And then apply the Vedic worldview and see whether you were able to function on the basis of Satya. Did you see what is the ideal behind it? What was the deepest truth of that situation? Look at the Rita or the action that must be performed, and what is the Brihat? If you looked at it from the perspective of the vast, which is about dropping your ego that might be hurt, etc., then how does that allow you to look at the circumstance? This is a very, very helpful suggestion, in fact, to make sure that you are not getting caught up by your ego reactions to different circumstances and therefore acting in manners that might be short-termed and therefore harmful for you in the long run. And therefore, what would be the rhythm that you would have done to do the right action that flowed spontaneously from that truth? As a journal exercise, write 3 sentences contrasting your actual reaction with the ideal rhythm action. So I have a suggestion here, which is that supposing you have reacted in an angry manner to somebody, I would suggest that you try and replay that scenario in your mind and think about alternatives in which you could have reacted to that same situation or the same trigger, in which case you would have experienced a greater good for yourself and for the other individual. See if you can identify that. And so, some food for thought. Sri Aurobindo says, Dharma is the fundamental law of our nature which secretly conditions all our activities. And in this sense, each being, type, species, individual, group has its own dharma. Secondly, there is the divine nature which has to develop and manifest in us. And in this sense, dharma is the law of the inner workings by which that grows in our being. Thirdly, there is the law by which we govern our outgoing thought and action and our relations with each other so as to help best both our growth and that of the human race towards the divine ideal. So think about these things and let's try and discover what our own Swadharma is in order to act in the best way possible. Glossary for you. and then some references. Thank you. As we close the session, I think it is very important for us to try and recalibrate our decision-making mechanisms and try and see if we can identify what would be the Satyam, what would be the Rita, and what is the consciousness of Brihat as well as the result of Brihat that can inform our decision-making. It's a long journey, but it is a journey that is possible. We are all co-passengers or co-travelers on this journey of discovering our greater selves. Namaste.